welcome to the Wormhole Podcast, episode 74. Bringing on an author and talking with them in detail about one, occasionally more, of their books, and today is one of those days. I'm Charlie Place, and today I am joined by Kristina McMorris. She's the author of several books, including Letters from Home, Bridge of Scarlet Leaves, and The Edge of Lost. We'll be talking today about Kristina's 2018 novel, Sold on a Monday, in which a reporter in 1931 takes a staged photograph of two children with a sign in front of them that reads "Two Children for Sale." This photograph leads to the reporter's much hoped for promotion, but it also leads to the staged photo becoming a reality. And we'll also touch on last year's The Ways We Hide, which was in Target's top 5 books of the year last year, its publication year, and became an instant international bestseller. Pretty damn cool. Without further ado then, hello Kristina.
Hi, thank you again for having me. I appreciate being here.
It is wonderful to have you on. So if we start with Sold on a Monday. This photograph in your book, it's fictional, but it's based on a real photograph. Can you tell us about it and how you came to write the book?
Of course, I'm thrilled to be talking about it. So thank you for the opportunity. There's obviously a lot of topics that we'll delve into, but I'll start with what the book is about. So yes, as far as the story goes, it is about a reporter named Ellis Reed, as you know. He happens across two kids on a farmhouse porch in rural Pennsylvania. He snaps a photo of them because there is a sign next to them that reads "Two Children for Sale." Now, he doesn't mean for this to go to the newspaper, but in a twist of fate, it leads to his big break and has devastating consequences for everybody involved. So as you know through the story, he tries to see if it's too late to make things right. And the original photograph that inspired the whole novel is an actual photograph. It stunned me as a mom when I came across it. There are 4 children in the photo. They are sitting on their own stoop in Chicago in 1948. There is a mother that is turned away from the camera, seemingly in shame, and a sign that reads "4 Children for Sale, inquire within." And I stopped when I saw that as a mother myself. I couldn't understand it. I thought I could understand giving up your children because you thought they'd have a better life without you, but not because you thought you could get money in return. And as the photo continued to haunt me for several years, as I wrote The Edge of Lost, I finally came back to it and did a little digging online to find out a bit more about the real children in the photograph, what really happened. The photo looks like it was from the Great Depression, which is why I set my story during that time period. But I was surprised it was 1948. I think we all, especially in the US, typically think of post-World War II as being a very prosperous time for the whole country, full of parades and GI Bills. And you don't think of people selling their children from their own home. When I read a bit about the family in an article, a follow-up piece that was done about all the children as adults, there was one line that stuck with me, and it said that some family members claimed the photo was staged. Now, when I went back to the photograph, that sign is so perfectly painted with even accent marks on the letters. I couldn't picture this mother doing that. And yet I did know that the children were sold and or given away within 2 years of that photograph going what we call today viral, running in about 10 different states and newspapers. People were sending in donations and money and job offers. So it also tells you the kind of still struggle that was happening in the country, that people were not looking down on her for that, but actually sending in gifts and trying to help the family. And so that sentence that said it might be staged, I wondered which one happened first. Was it staged and then it led to them being sold, or the other way around? And so that is what prompted my story.
Well, something I found fascinating was that you met one of the original children.
I did. So Rayanne is the oldest girl in the photograph, and I did meet her after I wrote the book. So after I had written it, NPR had asked me if I'd reached out to the family. I, of course, wanted to. I was fascinated by them. I felt like I'd kind of lived with them for a while, and that I was looking at their photograph every single day, writing about a fictional version, of course. So it was not their story, but I still felt I had a bit of a connection inadvertently to them. And so the book was gaining a lot of buzz at the time. And I thought, they may hear about this, and I would love for them to hear about it from me first. But more than that, just having a personal connection. I just had hesitated only because you think, does this family really want to hear from me? Not everybody wants the phone call of, I saw this horrible photograph you had as a child, and it stayed with me so much that I wrote a whole book about it. It's not always the phone call that somebody would want to receive. And so I was hesitant, and I'm so glad I reached out to her. She was so warm and welcoming, and we became instant friends. And then I actually tried to help her find a daughter that was taken away from her as a child. And that's like a whole other story in and of itself.
You may write a book about that, I realise, or you want to go into that another time. I will add the photograph for listeners so you can see what it is. And also, there were a couple of clips of an interview by Rayanne Mills, I believe her name was. I think her brother as well, so I'll add them for listeners as well. It's quite harrowing. There's short clips and they're entirely harrowing. The thing that struck me, going back to your book itself now, is that you have changed the outcomes somewhat, well, quite a lot in a way, for your fictional children. Although there are elements that happened to the real 4 children that you've included as well. I noticed when I'd gone and done the research, this was important to do to change that outcome. Absolutely. That was part of why I wrote the book. When I found out their terrible circumstances that Rayanne and her brother were sold, well, actually, in fact, it was Rayanne that was sold for $2 to a farmer and his wife to work as farm labor. Her brother started crying. He did not want to be separated from his sissy. And so the farmer said, fine, we'll take him too for free. So in that way, they were both sold. And Rayanne remembers her mother saying, great, I'll use the money to play bingo. So this was exactly the opposite of the story that I thought that maybe I could have compassion for this mother if maybe circumstances were different. It's hard to judge. We shouldn't. It's too easy, I should say, to judge people. And with just a photograph or a soundbite these days. And I thought context could change everything. What if she had another child who was sick and they were willing to take these children and raise them and feed them, and she also had money to save another child? I mean, there's so many circumstances that would be more palatable than what the truth was. And so it was really unfortunate to find out the truth. Yeah. Oh, I watched it a few days ago and yeah, I'd kind of like to forget it almost. But something I found interesting about your book, when I started it, I thought it would follow the children more. And it didn't. It followed the reporter, which actually I liked just as much. It wasn't a bad thing. It was really very interesting. I wonder if I could ask you about that, why you chose to focus on the reporter Ellis and also Lily more than the children, at least in the first part. Of course. And it's a natural and a good question because it was something that I asked myself as well when I started writing the book. It seemed like the natural thing would be to write the story from the children's point of view. And I was going to do that, but I couldn't get myself to start the book. It just seemed much too sad, first of all. And secondly, my friend Kristina Baker-Klein wrote a wonderful book, of course, that we all know called Orphan Train. And it felt very much like Orphan Train, except it involved a photograph. And I thought, there really wasn't much different about it in that you would have children who were sold, but then separated and try to find each other again. And I thought, that really is kind of a second version of a book that is already wonderful and exists. So I couldn't bring myself to do that. When I thought about the reporter standpoint, I thought, no, that to me was different. I hadn't seen that done before. I thought it was an interesting take on it to go through a different lens, but also more importantly, to have something that I think is fascinating, which is the ripple effect of our actions. Something that you think is just benign, that you make one small decision and it can lead through a domino effect. And at the end, as we all know in our lives, we look back and we think, how did we end up doing this? How did you end up in your podcast? And you can trace it back to so many steps through your life that maybe you never expected, that it wasn't a goal of mine anyway. And all because of maybe one conversation you had with a stranger that led you to go to a restaurant they recommended and you met somebody there. And I find that just absolutely fascinating. Well, given that then, there is something that I thought when I read about Ellis wondering about the children who he thought at that time, I should say the original photograph he takes, and the children have moved and he's worried that they've been sold, and turns out they haven't been, and that's okay. But something he wonders is whether he could have done something more for them rather than just, in quotes, taking a photograph and using it for his own purposes. Was there anything that Ellis could have done in that context when he saw the children? And I mean, could he have maybe helped them in another way, reported a different story? Was it more that they could just need money? Is there anything historical in that?
Well, I think that with his character, he didn't have much at the time being. He was struggling himself. He was barely getting by. He was living in a terrible apartment, as you know, with thin walls that you could hear everything, standing in a very long queue in order to go to the bathroom in the morning. And he was barely hanging on to his job at the time. So I think there's the struggles that somebody else, that somebody's going through in their lives, I think helps dictate how much we're willing to help somebody else sometimes, and probably too often. And I think that's human nature. Sometimes I think it's much easier to look back and think, oh, I could have helped more. I could have done this. I could have done this. But in the moment, I think that it doesn't really occur to him, what could he have done? I think he even thinks in that moment of, could I do this? Could I do this? And, it's kind of another family's business. And I think especially back then in that time period.
Mm-hmm. You were a TV host from the age of 9 to 15, and you've worked in media furthering that. And I was wondering if you could say how these experiences inform your writing and the decisions you made for Ellis, Lily, and the newspapers.
Sure. Yeah, I grew up in television in that I started hosting a kids' TV show at 9 years old, as you mentioned, for an ABC network affiliate station. It was kind of a kids' educational and entertainment show that was on weekly. So I grew up in the newsroom. So we would finish filming every Wednesday night. And after we were done, I was told to go hang out in the newsroom while they set up for the 10 or 11 o'clock news that night. And I was told to stay there for another hour to make sure there was nothing we had to reshoot because it was going to air that weekend and it was our only chance to reshoot anything. So I would sit and hang out with the weatherman and we would take his special pen and I got to move the clouds around, which I thought was very high tech and fun. So because of this, I grew up with all the anchors and the reporters and the sportscasters, and they were all like uncles and aunts to me and friends. And I still know several of them and good friends with several of them to this day. And so because of this, I was very familiar with the newsroom. I was familiar with the daily deadlines that they had. They were rushing against the clock and how they had to go after a new story every day or, seeking out long-term ones that they had to keep hunting down. And I found it all very fascinating. So for me, I didn't know that it was going to come back into my life in a different way. But when I wrote about a reporter, that was another reason it resonated with me because I thought I'm very familiar with that. I did go back to the station years later in my college years and worked as an intern as a reporter. And then I also started writing articles years later for newspapers. So it was definitely within my wheelhouse.
I just remember opening the book and sitting down, starting it and going, okay, this is just going to be great. All the reporter stuff and the amount of atmosphere that you've got in there. And I just thought, yeah, there's going to be some more in here. I tried not to research you so much so I could read the book and then do it afterwards. But yeah, it all made sense. It was great.
Thank you. I'm glad to hear that. It was fun to write it. And I also made a point of going to an editor-in-chief who's still a family friend and gave him all the chapters that had to do with the newsies, with the reporters, the newsrooms, anything like that, any language that was used to make sure that it rang true, that it was accurate. And he gave it the thumbs up, which was fantastic.
Yeah, no, it's that and the time period was great. Sticking on the subject of the newsroom, the reporters. So the original title, though you knew it wouldn't make publication, I believe you said, it was The Creation of Truth, which I found absolutely fascinating. I have to ask you about it. Can you talk about that in terms of the theme in the book with newspapers and how Ellis is presenting the truth and that kind of thing?
Yeah, for sure. That was me, my original title. I knew that it wasn't going to be the final. I couldn't think of anything better. I really like it. I like the concept of it, this creation of truth. I think that is not just in news, but in our own lives. And when we're not talking about factual, but really just about our version and our perception of what has happened, our memories of the past are all built on that. And so I thought, that is kind of interesting when you apply it also to news with people's lives. I thought it was a bit literary sounding, and that is what my agent thought too. And she said, I hope you're not married to this title. I said, no, I know it's going to change. I knew that it would present the book as more of a literary book, and that is not what it is. And so I knew it would change. When we sold it as 1,000 words, being that a photograph, of course, is worth 1,000 words. And I knew that also was not going to be the final title. But it was okay for the time being. And interesting enough, how Sold on a Monday came about, which I think was actually, the perfect title for it. It's different. It's easy to remember. with the photograph on the front, it tells the story of what's inside the book. And I thought that was very effective. Where it came from, and this actually applies to your earlier question, why didn't I write about the kid's point of view? And interesting enough, when I wrote a prologue as an experiment, strictly as an experiment, could I write this all from the kid's point of view? And when I thought, I will just write a couple paragraphs, and it came out of me very quickly. I wrote it from the little girl standpoint, and it started with, I was sold on a Tuesday. And from there, I wrote out 2 paragraphs very quickly. But then I realized that I really wanted the story to be different. And I thought by having a prologue from a kid's point of view and then not coming back to her point of view until the epilogue would be misrepresenting and misleading the reader. You would think, what? Wait a minute. I thought I was on board for a different kind of story. And I think that can set up for disappointment, no matter how good a book is or a movie is. If you think that you're going down a different journey, it can be disappointing. And so I thought, this won't work. I don't think I'm going to do this. And my agent agreed. However, I had told my editor about that first sentence because I thought it was a very strong first sentence. It's the kind of sentence that I wouldn't be able to put a book down if I read that in a bookstore. And she remembered it and had pitched it to marketing and sales and all these people throughout the year while I was writing the book. And so when we came back to the title of the book, she said, I know that you didn't include a prologue that you mentioned to me that you were thinking about, but that opening sentence you mentioned always stuck with me, and I've used it everywhere. And it was, I was sold on a Monday. I didn't have the heart to tell her that it was actually Tuesday. And also I thought Monday had a nicer ring to it. So I thought, that's actually softer with the consonants. I liked it more. So we went with that. I said, oh my gosh, yes. And we both instantly agreed that that was the right title.
Am I remembering rightly, you do have sold on a Monday in a sentence in the book still?
I do. And that was after we came up with the title. So once we came up with the title, I realized that there was never a time in the book that I really made really clear when children were sold. The day of the week was not very clear. And I thought, you know what, to tie this all back into the title, went back and added a couple sentences about what did Ellis sell on that Monday? Did he sell his integrity? Did he sell his morals? And I thought it really tied in well, and I liked the message of it. So it wasn't just tacked on for convenience of a title. I felt like it really gave the title power and a message as far as how he's self-reflecting.
Mm-hmm. You've listed a few things there. And of course, I suppose you've got the very easy, interpretation of the newspaper sold on Monday as well. So everything gets wrapped up.
Yes, absolutely.
I wanted to ask, there's the question of reliability in the newspapers and things like that. Are there any times you would say where the narrative or maybe different characters in the book are unreliable narrators/characters?
I think unreliable narrators, I don't think of them that way. I think that they, like Ellis, tells himself things to make himself feel better about his life and about his choices. And I think that he is not alone. I think, we all do that to some extent. There are secrets that are in his family and with the other characters, as you know, that you start unpeeling the layers of why people act the way that they do. Why do they make the choices they do? And as you see through the story, Lily, his kind of cohort, she's a work colleague that becomes much more involved than she ever expects in his life as well, in their journey. So she is one too that I think a lot of secrets that come out, you understand, even if you don't agree with all of the choices of my characters, hopefully you then at least understand where it comes from. And that especially includes Ellis's father, as you know, that there are secrets that come to the surface that are things, especially in that generation, that they would not speak about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've been skirting around the subject, I suppose, in a way. Can we talk about Ellis and Lily? Could you tell us about how you came to create them as characters and who they are, etc.?
Sure. So Ellis is one that, as I said, is struggling. It's the Great Depression. He really wants to be a top-notch reporter. More than anything, it's less about this just driven ambition, which is why I gave him, I thought, an interesting backstory. That's something that I could latch onto, which was he so much wants his father's approval. That is his driving force. And it is because Ellis was essentially invisible in his own home. And he sees reporters as being ones who were helping change laws about child labor and making a difference. And when you get a byline back then, they did not give them out easily at all. Not that they give them out easily today in big papers, but much easier today than back then. And it was very difficult to get your name in a newspaper as a reporter. And so when you did, it's kind of like, I made it, and he felt like to be seen is to matter. And so as he's struggling to get his father's respect and approval, he starts to understand why it has been so hard. And that truth raises to the surface. So I think that he is a very good person at heart. I think that he is a very moral person. And yet I love characters like that who have a strong moral compass, but lose their way and then try to find their way back again and try to make the right choices at the end of the day. And Lily is one without, let's see here, giving too much away. She is a secretary at the newspaper and she wants to be a reporter herself. So it would seem very progressive back then. But of course, women didn't get into the positions that we have today without women like that, without ones that didn't accept where their station was and try to fight harder for more. And she's a very skilled writer and wants to be a reporter herself and uncover great, meaningful stories. And so she sort of stumbles into this journey with him. But she also has a whole secret life that she is keeping hidden because if it were out, she would not have any opportunities that she does.
Can we talk about the bit that secret life? Can we touch on it a bit?
Yes, I hate to give too much away.
We'll try. I was just going to ask, you had a really interesting question in the back of the book in the book club questions, and I wondered if I could ask it to you. You have a question about Lily, her motivations, her trying to get her promotion and become a columnist. The question asks whether she's doing it effectively for herself or for her family. What would be your answer on this?
I would say absolutely both. And I think at that time period, you would think that it would be wrong for her, for a woman to want to do that for herself, to have a career and to juggle family and values in that regard. But I think she absolutely wants to do it for both, trying to help support her family as well as herself.
Mm-hmm. I think you put her in an interesting situation for that makes you really question your own thoughts, because she does have the family and the family has a business, but she has her own desires as well. And then you've got the different time. So it does make you question, which is great. I love it. So motherhood and the relationship between parents and children are an important theme. You've got Ellis's worries about his father's views, as you've spoken about, and then Lily's own struggles. And obviously the children and Geraldine. Are you able to talk about the theme of motherhood itself?
Sure. Yeah. Motherhood is a huge theme in the book. And it's not really how I set out to write the story, but it became very clear about halfway through that in very different ways, the story is about family, I think, and motherhood as well. So those are two major themes, is our familial ties and how our family upbringing and those circumstances help dictate later in life a lot of the choices that we make, or at least guide us that way, even though we still are making our own decisions. And so, yeah, family and motherhood is such a fascinating bond, but also it creates challenges and obstacles at times and decisions that we constantly have to make, and always hoping that we're making the right choice for ourselves, for our family, for our children, and only being able in hindsight to look back and decide if that was the case.
I will try not to say anything else because I know we're trying to be careful with spoilers, so I will leave that there deliberately. So, okay then, we will move on to The Ways We Hide, which was released in 2022. And I think we will be explaining the story through our conversation, but as said, it was a Target top 5 of the year and an instant international bestseller. You were inspired by a particular photo, again, in a way, another photo inspired this book, as Sold on Monday was. Could you tell us about that initial photograph?
Absolutely. So it was on the same website that I found the photo of the children being offered for sale. There was another photograph that also haunted me as a mother, especially, was documenting the disaster known as the Italian Hall disaster in Calumet, Michigan. And it was, in short, the result of a false cry of fire that someone yelled into the Italian Hall. So it was the community center. And it had all these immigrant children that were celebrating Christmas Eve. So it triggered a stampede in the stairwell. It's horribly tragic. I believe that the number was right. About 73 people died. Most of them were children. And I couldn't believe I hadn't heard about this before. So those two photographs were together. I had set that photograph in a folder for the future of ideas to consider because I wanted to share that this happened. And yet I also thought it was much too sad to base an entire novel on. And it wasn't until years later that I went back to my file folder, and it was right next to an article titled How Monopoly Helped the Allies Win World War II. And it was about MI9, which you may be more familiar with, and a lot of Americans aren't. And they were essentially the go-go gadget team, is what I call them, of World War II, that they created escape and evade devices. They helped smuggle through almost anything you can think of, including Monopoly boards, into POW camps to help the Allies escape. And they worked with magicians and illusionists in order to do this as well. And so when I saw the two things together, I thought, wait a minute, what if the Italian Hall disaster is my character's backstory instead? And because of being a survivor of the stampede, she becomes obsessed with escape. She needs two ways out of every room at all times, and Houdini becomes her idol. And because of this, she gets recruited by MI9 when she is the mastermind behind an escape show. And then she gets pulled much deeper into the war than she ever expects, which is why it's called The Ways We Hide for several reasons.
I must have missed the bit where I was doing my research and reading about how you'd come to write the book. I must have missed that bit where you said that this photo happened to be next to the article. So that's something really quite wow, isn't it, really?
It worked out very conveniently. And when I finally looked those two things together, I'd had the article for about 4 years and thought it was so interesting about the escapes and about Monopoly and all this, but I didn't think it created an entire novel. Same thing. So when I put the two together, I had about 2/3 of the novel play out in my head like a movie in about 15 minutes. And then I knew I needed to write the book.
Oh, goodness, wow. Did they ever find out why the person happened to yell fire? Was there a reason?
The only thing that they can come up with theory-wise is that some of the witnesses claim that he was wearing a pin on his lapel that was anti-union. And all of these immigrants were on strike with the copper mines. And so the theory goes that he may have just been trying to pull a terrible prank and did not hopefully realize how badly that would misfire.
Okay, all right. Could you expand more on your main character, on Fenna?
So a little bit about Fenna is that she is the mastermind behind an escape show in 1942. And the reason why she is just the mastermind behind it, of course, and not the one on stage, is because it was much more accepted and expected from a woman to be than the assistant in a very flattering outfit and point him in all the directions to be the showman. But there is also another reason. It's because she is terrified of getting inside the box. So that is something that she leaves to the showman to do instead and kind of take all the glory when he reappears and things. And that all traces back to the trauma she survived. She's claustrophobic. And so she's very good at building these contraptions and yet is not the one that's going to get inside of there.
Listeners, I have to confess I haven't read The Ways We Hide. I'm listening to Kristina's description, and I don't know about you guys, but I'm thinking this is quite a unique story. I've never heard anything quite like it. It's pretty damn good. And I think if we leave The Ways We Hide there, because, let people go and explore it. But I would like to ask you, what are you writing at the moment?
Sure. Well, I have a couple of things coming out right away. I've got a short story called Poppy Story, and that is part of one of those Amazon really fun collections that they release all at once, 8 different stories. And I was fortunate enough to be asked to write one and contribute for Mother's Day. So that is coming out in just, I think, 2 more days. And so it's free to Prime readers and Kindle Unlimited readers as well. And people also, of course, can buy it Audible, et cetera. I'm excited about that in that I got to take a minor character out of The Ways We Hide, a little girl named Poppy. And at the end of the story, in the epilogue of The Ways We Hide, Fenna wonders, I wonder whatever happened to her, what became of her life. Well, this is the answer to that. So she is a mother-to-be. She is a teacher. It is really a tribute to teachers, and that it is set also during the Cuban Missile Crisis, as everyone sets their Mother's Day stories during that, don't they? Isn't that the first thing that comes to mind? And you can imagine then the kind of question she has in her mind of, does this make any sense to bring a child into this world during such a tumultuous time? She wonders, how can she possibly protect her own child? How can she protect these children? they're hiding under desks during a time that people are building bunkers in their backyards. So it was really fun to revisit her character and to have a different time period I haven't written about before, which is the 1960s. So that was really fun. So that is Poppy's story. And then other than that, I have a Christmas novella coming out with another author who's a friend of mine, Tammy Greenwood. And that comes out, since it's a Christmas story, it naturally comes out in August when we all start our Christmas shopping. That's called The Season of Second Chances. And they put both of our novellas together in this one book. So that'll be very fun to be able to promote together and do some touring together. And then I will say, other than that, in January of next year, my sister and I have a picture book coming out. We're on a contract for 2, and our first one comes out called Ellie Mae Dreams Big, all about, a girl that is trying to make decisions on what she wants to be when she grows up as an assignment for school. She has a very hard time making decisions, like my oldest son to this day. And so she mashes things together. So instead of being just an astronaut or a chef, she knows the mood is made of cheese. She's going to take a big slice out of it and make the best galactic grilled cheese sandwiches in the universe and make a fly-through for aliens. So you can imagine how much fun we had putting together different careers and mashing them up. And of course, the message is that you can really be anything you set your mind to. So that comes out in January. And then I will be in between these kind of podcasts that are so fun to do, and a break away from my solo lonely time with my laptop is I'll be writing the next novel, and that's due in December. And it is another historical, but set in the 1800s. So that is new for me. And that will have to do with a very seedy and corrupt and fascinating history about Oregon, which is where I'm from. And there is undergrounds and really interesting stuff that a lot of people don't know.
You're a particularly busy author right now, then, I think.
It's nice to be employed. It's always good to be busy, for sure.
Yes, I mean, you kind of got, a month late, but a Christmas in July kind of idea there, then, almost. I like that you've got the Cuban Missile Crisis as a Mother's Day. I mean, you can't just have the Hearts and Flowers, you've got to have other things as well, so it's fair enough.
A few bombs here and there, Yeah, but I think it's interesting because the parallels of today, that it is always a scary time, I think, and you wonder, is it a good time to bring a child into this world when there's so much going on that is scary? And you have children hiding under desks for different reasons today. And I think that the role of teachers is pretty phenomenal.
No, definitely. Done a lot of good, particularly in the last few years, as we know. So, is there anything you would like to add to the end of this podcast? Anything we haven't covered enough, or anything we haven't covered at all that you think we should talk about at all?
No, I think we covered everything, except that I will say, if any readers want to find out more about the stories and also find some fun things that we didn't touch on, they can go to my website, because on there, with the ways we hide, for example, I have videos of demonstrations that I have of MI9 gadgets from World War II that were so fun to collect. And so there's a lot of extra material on there, book club guides and activities and recipes and all kinds of things like that we don't always get to squeeze into the book.
Kristina, this has been absolutely lovely today. I've really enjoyed having you on, really looked forward to it. And yes, sold on a Monday. There is a reason it's sold 1 million copies. Absolutely. The Ways We Hide, I'm going to go read it. Thank you very much for being here today. It's been lovely.
Thank you. I've enjoyed every minute. Take care.
Thank you very much for listening. Please do share this episode with anyone you think may be interested in it. The Wormhole Podcast, episode 74, was recorded on the 25th of April and published on the 8th of May, 2023. Music and production by Charlie Place.